Well, today we're talking with Shelley Read, the author of Go as a River. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Doris. I'm so happy to join you today.
Oh, you bet. Um, your first novel has already sold 800,000 copies. That's a debut novel. And it's been released, and now it's being released in paperback, and it's soon to be a film, I understand.
Yeah.
So, in a few lines, tell us what the story is about.
The novel is about a young woman named Victoria Nash growing up along the banks of the wild Gunnison River here on the western slope of the Colorado Rockies, where I live. And we follow Victoria from 1948 through a wide variety of very difficult circumstances and difficult decisions until 1971. And it really is a story about place and displacement, about home and family and where we turn when those really essential things are lost. And it's really the story of a young woman discovering herself and the depth of her strength and resilience, all very rooted in the natural world and the very unpredictable circumstances that we all can find ourselves in as we travel through our lives.
And and it's based on a real historical event in Iola, Colorado. Tell us, how did you create that sense of place? It almost becomes a character itself.
Yeah, I know. I really love that when people say that. One of my favorite reviews that I ever saw of my novel was that it said like that it read like a love song to Colorado. So I'll have to tell you that I'm a fifth generation Coloradan. And so I am very, very rooted to this landscape and learned so many of the stories of this land through my ancestors, my grandfather, who was a wonderful storyteller. And I live in the exact setting here high in the Gunnison County where the novel is set. So this is a landscape that I know very intimately as a mountaineer and someone who spends a lot of time out in the wilderness. And I've always known the story of how Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is the largest reservoir in Colorado, how Blue Mesa Reservoir was created. There were three towns, thriving ranching and fishing communities that were along the Gunnison River. And those towns were evacuated and flooded and essentially just completely erased from the map in order to create Blue Mesa Reservoir. And I've always wondered, what was it like for those people to be displaced from that land? And I thought that that was a wonderful setting and a little piece of Colorado history that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. I felt like the right setting to tell the story of Victoria Nash, my main character.
And yeah, Victoria. So tell us a little bit about Victoria, what her family is like, and maybe talk to us a little bit about the other characters that we meet because they're so interesting, like Og and Ruby Alice.
We talked as we were coming on that we both have dogs in in our house. I was like, well, we're hoping for the best, but that didn't go very well.
That's
We
okay.
kicked him out. Um, Victoria Nash, she is a young woman who we meet on the very first pages of the novel as she meets a young drifter whose name is Wilson Moon. And I wanted to start Victoria's story there, kind of a little meditation on the idea of happenstance in our life, just a chance meeting between two young people on a street corner in a tiny town in rural Colorado in 1948, and ask what are the possibilities there? What is possible for each one of those characters. Victoria is very rooted to the land. She is part of, as on the cover of my novel, is a peach, which surprises some people because of the title of the novel is Go as a River. But I love that there's a peach on the cover because Victoria's family, they're peach farmers. And yes, we do grow beautiful peaches here on the western slope of Colorado. I get that question a lot. Um, Her family are peach farmers, and it is the one beautiful thing that Victoria has in her life. Other than that, she has had a lot of grief, a lot of loss, a lot of difficulty. And once she meets this young indigenous young man, a drifter named Wilson Moon, everything changes for her and for Wilson Moon. And that's essentially where we pick up the story and then follow them from there.
How do you show the personalities? I mean, you even show the personality of someone who's dead, mom, for
Yeah.
example.
Yes.
in the world do you do that? How do you achieve that?
Well, and that's not giving too much away because we learned that Victoria's mother and her aunt and her beloved cousin have died. We learned that right in the first few pages of the novel. So I I really wanted to investigate Victoria both as a very solitary character, which she is in a lot of ways, but also a character who's sort of a product of both her landscape and of her family. And so when we meet her, she's caring for the rather ragged men in her family as a result of her mother's death. So the fact that her mother has passed, I call Victoria sort of patternless. She's this young woman coming of age in a house full of men, and because she doesn't have her mother, she is patternless in a lot of ways. So she just very sort of obediently and blindly steps into the role of caretaker and housekeeper of the family. And when the novel opens, she really has no sense of who she is outside of those expectations. And so I think that a lot of the characters in the novel who have already passed on, some of them form um, they figure as prominently as some of the characters that are alive and present as the narrative unfolds, because it's really the circumstances that Victoria finds herself in that really defines the path of her story.
Yes, and you use some strong symbolism um, to add emotional quality. For example, I'm sorry, we've got yard mowers outside now, in addition to the dog.
Dogs, mowers, it's life, it's fine.
But there's a sentence in your book where you say it's the cold nights and warm days of early autumn on Colorado's western slope that sweetens the fruit sugar.
Yeah.
Do you use symbolism in tell it intentionally, or is that something that just subconsciously happens?
Oh, yes. The symbolism of the peaches all the way through the novel really figure very prominently. Um, we do grow, as I said, wonderful peaches here in Colorado, but it's very, very difficult to grow them here because we have large temperature differentiations, a little bit different than growing peaches anywhere else in the country. We have late frosts, we have very unpredictable weather. And so I really wanted to pull on the symbolism of the idea of growing against the odds because certainly Victoria Nash's story is her growing against the odds. We also talk about, or also write about the idea of resilience in new soil, the idea of transplantation. In the novel about displacement, how does one start a new life and put down new roots when one is forced off of one's homeland? I investigate that through Victoria Nash being forced out of her hometown of Iola, as well as reference to well before the predominantly white farmers and ranchers of the Iola area were displaced, were the indigenous people from that exact same land were forcibly displaced. So there's layers and layers of displacement in this area where the novel is set. And I thought that the transplantation, a forced transplantation of a peach orchard, was a wonderful symbolism of that um, uh,
Yes,
of that idea of having to find new roots and put down roots in new soil.
yes,
And
yes.
then also, as you said, how do we still find our sweetness? How do we still find a way to grow as our best selves after we've faced all of these challenges? I also have the symbolism of the rivers. So the novel, the title "Go as a River," also pulls heavily on the metaphor of the rivers throughout the novel, and the idea that rivers always find a way to move forward. They can go up and around obstacle, under obstacle, they can carve new banks when necessary. But the symbolism of the rivers throughout the novel encourages the reader to consider Victoria's story as one of resilience, one of someone who always finds a way to move forward no matter what obstacle is put in her path.
You balance description and dialogue very well. And I'm wondering how you uh, do this without the taboo of telling rather than showing.
Well, that is always the challenge, that's for sure. I think maybe one of the ways that I did that was many, many revisions. I worked on this novel for about 13 years, actually. So
Oh,
I think it's just extra sweet and extra lovely to be able to speak with you and some of the other readers who have really loved the book when this really was such a labor of love for me. I was teaching full time, I was raising my kids, and also I wrote and rewrote and I thought about it and I reconsidered scenes and sentences to try so hard to get this story just right. And I think a lot of that became the balance of what to say and what to leave out, what to put in dialogue, what to put in flashback, what to put in current action, and also just whose story is this first and foremost. My character, Victoria Nash, as you mentioned, she's one of sort of a whole cast of characters in the novel. And yet I kept measuring every description, every idea, every bit of dialogue against the measurement of, does this serve Victoria's story? Am I telling Victoria's story as well as I possibly can? And if the answer was yes, then it could stay. If the answer was no, I would have to let it go, even if it was a passage that I really loved. And that kept me really focused on what mattered in what I included in the actual narrative and what I left out.
Very good answer. The story is told in short chapters. Why?
Well, yeah, relatively short chapters. I think, again, this wasn't planned. I really just let this novel unfold however it needed to unfold. But what I learned about myself as a novelist, because even though I've been writing my whole life, I never actually even imagined myself a novelist. It was more once I started imagining Victoria's story and I realized, oh my goodness, in order to tell this fully, this is going to have to be a novel. And then I thought, oh no, I don't know. I don't know how to write a novel. But I figured it out as I went along. And what I learned about myself as a writer is that I very much write in scenes. And I didn't necessarily do it sequentially, in order. But when a scene would come to mind, I would tackle that scene until I felt like I fully understood it. And so I think maybe the episodic nature of the finished manuscript had something to do with the fact that scenes matter a lot to me. And then I had to go back and sort of piece them all together into an overall narrative that made sense. So I think that lended itself to the chapters and the sections of the novel.
Well, without giving away too much, I was surprised to see a whole chapter written from another viewpoint. Can you explain why you chose to choose viewpoints very late in this story? Or
Yeah.
maybe you can't say
So
anything about that.
I'll be careful with no spoilers, but I will say that the majority of the novel is written from Victoria Nash's first person point of view. And that narrative perspective just evolved for me very naturally. Once I started imagining her character, her voice started forming in my head, and honestly, I was able to slip into Victoria's voice very easily in a lot of ways. I started thinking in Victoria's voice, honestly. But then, yes, later on in the novel, a very important plot point and a very important coming together of a couple of the characters required that I tell a bit of a story that would have been outside Victoria's knowledge. And so I had to figure out, well, how can I bring in this element of the story? And so later I bring in an entirely different first person point of view narrative. And that was very challenging as well because I had to distinguish their voices so that the reader could feel and tell that we were leaving Victoria's first person point of view, her voice, and moving into this other character's voice just for the brief amount of time that it required to tell this very important part of the overall story. And then we go back into Victoria's narrative. I will tell you, I struggled and struggled with exactly how to do that. I played with lots of different ways. And again, I owe it so much to lots of different the willingness to do lots of different versions of this story, as well as once I started working with my wonderful editor, Cindy Spiegel at Spiegel and Grau, my publisher, she helped me to kind of think through and reimagine a little bit of how I was going to structure the coming together of those two characters.
How many times did you edit this?
I don't know. I'm always a little envious of writers who say, oh, I did 10 drafts or 20 drafts or 30. what I found is that I edit as I go along, even though I always tell my students don't do that. And yet I find that that's kind of how I am. I will work and rework a sentence or a paragraph or a scene over and over again before I feel like I'm ready to move on. So I don't really have a tangible measurement of how many actual revisions I did of this novel, but I will tell you it was a lot. And I'm happy for the process. I learned so much
Mhm.
about writing and about how to construct a longer narrative by allowing that process to sort of unfold and to always be willing to go back and look at what I've written and ask, can I say that more clearly? Can I say that more true to Victoria's story?
Beautiful. What was your did you doubt yourself along the way when you were developing this story?
No, that's a wonderful question. I don't know that I ever doubted myself, but I did doubt, um, maybe what I doubted the most was my ability to fully commit to my creative life in the midst of my very busy life that was outside of my creativity. My life
Oh,
as a professor, I've taught at Western Colorado University for decades. My
yeah.
life as a mother, I would open my computer file of Go as a River, and sometimes I hadn't opened that file in 3, 4 months, all depending on what was going on with my family and what my kids needed. And I'll share with you that in that time of writing Go as a River, we had some enormous challenges in our life, a really tragic loss in my family. I had a terrible illness. My husband had an accident. We had some really difficult challenges during that time, which I think is true for any life. I think one of the things I really wanted to dig into with Go as a River is a deeper sense of compassion and empathy for the fact that all of us carry difficulties and all of us carry grief. And I wanted to tell that story through Victoria Nash, but interestingly, I was sort of living it at the same time. And so if I doubted anything along the way, it was more, did I have the ability to clear enough space in my life to channel some of these things that mattered so much to me in order to actually finish this novel? And honestly, yes, the novel's been very successful, well beyond my wildest dreams. But I will share with you, Doris, that the thing that I am still most proud of is that I finished it. I don't actually even know how I did that, but I'm very proud of the fact that I finished it and then actually got it into the world, with a lot of help from people who also
In
believed.
fact, about 90% of the writers never do finish.
Yes, yes, and it would have been very easy for me to abandon it. But again, it was all my love for Victoria Nash. I love this character so much.
Do you plan to write other novels?
Uh, yeah, I am working on a second novel currently, and I'm just coming into the fact where the place with it that I'm starting to really love it. I have to say, I lived with the characters in Go as a River for so many years that when I started writing this new novel, they felt like strangers to me, as well as there's been an enormous international success component to Go as a River. It's being translated into 34 languages and it's been on bestseller lists in different places all over the world. And so ever since it was released, I've actually still been very, very focused on book touring and talking about and still living in the space of Go as a River. And so it's been a little bit more difficult for me to get into this new novel.
And
But
that
I am.
surprised you? Did that success surprise you?
Oh, yes. Honestly, never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined. I am so grateful to so many people who helped make that happen.
Why do you think that is? How do you think you engage so many people? With
Yes, I appreciate that question because I've asked that question deeply myself because I was so surprised, especially a debut novel. I'm 59 years old. It was released when I was 57. Putting a debut novel in the world at my age, starting a whole new career, trust me, I have pondered that question deeply. And one of the wonderful things of being able to be out on book tour a lot, both here in the United States and throughout Europe, is I've been able to actually meet my readers and ask them that question. What is it about this book that is resonating cross-culturally? And what I've heard over and over again is they really feel a sense of authenticity in the novel. They can tell that I'm writing about a landscape that I love. They can also, I think, appreciate the celebration of the natural world in the novel. And I think maybe on some level people are craving a deeper relationship with the natural world in their lives. And I really think a lot of it is this story of strength and resilience that in a complex world and complex time, complex times, I think that a lot of people really love the character of Victoria Nash and how she finds a way to rise to each challenge and to grow a little bit each step along the way. And I think we all are maybe needing some of that in our lives. I think those things are what's resonating the most with readers all over the world. But boy, I am so grateful and I've been so touched by feeling connected. I think sometimes in our modern world we can feel very divided. And what this novel has helped me to understand is that we all still hold a lot of the same values, of family and love of the land and just love in general. A lot of this novel is about love in all of its different forms. And it's really been lovely to see that that really matters to people and that that can really be a source of connection for all of us.
Yes, indeed. I believe you are right about that. Tell us a little bit about how in the world did you find your agent, Sandra Bond, and how did you, to both of you, convince Cindy Spiegel to book on?
That's a great question. I'm so happy to say I just had Sandra here in my hometown of Crested Butte. She just came to visit me last weekend for a local literary festival that we have called Mountain Words Literary Festival, and we got to sit in front of an audience and tell this exact story because everybody wants to know, how did you two connect? Um, I will share with you that I'm a very kind of quiet and shy writer. I don't tend to show my work to anybody while I'm writing it. And so when I felt that Go as a River was ready to put out in the world, it was an enormous step. I was very nervous. It was an enormous step to put it into anyone's hands. And so I thought, well, I am a very Colorado woman. This is a very Colorado story. And I said, hey, Google, who are the literary agents in Colorado? That's basically how and Sandra Bond's name popped up, and I sent her my manuscript. She loved it right away. And it was a really crucial moment to connect with Sandra because I had been working on it for so many years. And I think sometimes we as authors can be too close to our work. We don't necessarily have the perspective on it. And I really needed Sandra at that moment in my life to tell me that she thought I really had something here. And bless her, she stepped in and encouraged me from day one. That was the fast part of finding, of moving it into the world. The slower part was that then Sandra was very sure that this belonged in the hands of a larger publishing house. And so she queried many of them over the span of almost 3 years, 2.5 years or so,
Oh,
until and we received plenty of rejections as most manuscripts do. I always like to tell budding writers that, like, don't worry. Don't worry if you get rejections because there's a lot of timing, a lot of luck involved. And Sandra was always certain it would land with the perfect person, and so I never worried. And then once she got it into Cindy Spiegel's hands, I think Cindy really loved the writing about the natural world. And I am just eternally grateful to Cindy Spiegel for taking a chance on me as a debut novelist and to work with me on the spots of the novel that had some weak spots. Cindy stepped in and really believed in this book, and I'm eternally, eternally grateful. And then it was the publishing house Spiegel and Grau who connected me with my international agent, who is Susanna Lee. And Susanna Lee is the one who's responsible for putting it into the hands of publishing houses all over the world. So,
and what about the film?
yeah,
What,
the film, again, what an amazingly unexpected thing. The film is in really good hands with a film production company called Mazer Kaplan. And what Mazer Kaplan does is only books to film. Only books that they really love do they turn them into film. And it's run by Paula Mazur and Mitchell Kaplan, truly two of the kindest, most lovely people I have ever met, and they're book people. And so I feel like the novel is in really good hands with these filmmakers. And, that process is rather slow, especially with the strikes in Hollywood a couple years ago, as well as the fires, the sad, tragic fires in LA. So that is they call it in development. The film is in development and it is moving forward. It's just kind of a slow process. So I just like to think that it'll come around and happen whenever it does. And I have every faith in the world that it'll be beautiful.
Well, I tell you, I can't wait. I really can't. I'm very eager for that. One more question. Shelley Read, what do you tell authors, writers who are struggling to break into publishing today? It's so tough. What
Oh,
do you say?
it's so tough. And the teacher in me wants to just cheer on and encourage every single person. I tell people all the time that truly if it can happen to me, it can absolutely happen for you. But the main thing, two things, two pieces of advice that I would say. One is just absolutely believe in yourself. And if you love, love, love your story that you're telling, don't worry about anything else. Like try to get the any other fears and worries out of your mind. As I said, I think that readers really resonate when a writer shows up to something that they're writing very, very authentically. That they're not trying to write a bestseller, but they're just trying to tell the best story that they can. So that would be my first piece of advice. And my second piece of advice that I've always told my students is just to read. When you are reading and you are really studying narrative for exactly the choices that author made, you essentially are building yourself as a writer. So read, read, read. Reading has really defined my entire life, which is kind of ironic since that's actually how I spell my last name. I get people ask me if that's a pen name. It is not a pen name, but I am an enormous reader. And I think that reading as much as I have throughout my life has made me the writer that I am. So stick with both of those things. And I just have a feeling that if you give everything enough time and patience, then you too, as a writer, will find your way.
Shelley Read, thank you very much for talking with us today. Wonderful, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Doris, thank you so much for having me.